Maybe I should have included this in the previous podcast, but it's not always easy to plan these things. Nonetheless, moving forward, another attribute of the participants, the individual or team status of participants. So we'll look at more attributes of participants in a minute. Participants in many action situations may be individual persons, or they may represent a team or composite actors such as households. So household associations, owners associations, etc. Tend to work together to set rules on lawns, on various other things. A group of individuals may be considered as one participant, a team or an organization in a particular action situation. What might be the conditions in which it makes sense to treat a group of individuals as a participant? To consider a group of individuals to be a participant, one must assume that the individuals intend to participate in collective action. One needs to assume that the individuals who are being treated as a single actor intend to achieve a common purpose. Sometimes there are groups of individuals who share many similar characteristics, such as veterans, urban voters, or legal immigrants. So they are not necessarily organized and coming as one group, but they are loosely connected by the rules and norms that they follow, or the expectations we have from them, like urban voters do a certain kind of selection in their candidates, which can be treated for analysis many times as one individual. But they have different individual preferences if you go deeper, and they do not always act as a cohesive team, of course. Corporate actors such as firms are not so dependent on the preferences of their members and beneficiaries, because they are legally defined as an individual entity. Okay, the activities. So let's make sure I read it correctly. Corporate actors such as firms are not so dependent on the preferences of their members and beneficiaries, because they are legally defined as an individual entity. So when a corporation deals with rules, regulations, negotiations, purchasing, hiring, etc., it is acting as an individual entity, and the employees and managers in the system don't necessarily have preferences that they can impose on the process as a corporation. The activities in firms and organizations are carried out by staff members whose own private preferences are supposed to be neutralized by formal employment contracts. So the CEOs are often hired for their vision, and they can make changes, but then there's a board of governors they have to go through, and so on and so forth as well, right? Let's look at some attributes of participants. Participants differ in their characteristics, such as their skills, ethnic background, education, gender, values, etc. These characteristics may influence their actions in some situations, but not in others. The educational level of participants is not likely to affect the actions of the drivers passing one another on a busy highway. Right? You're driving along and you may be yelling at somebody who cuts you off, or is tagging you too closely behind and so on, as a moron, but that doesn't necessarily depend on any information about whether the person is really a moron or not. But when the participants meet each other in an emergency room in the positions of a patient and a physician, education becomes an important attribute, because even if you're a doctor, when you are on the patient table, you want the other person to be a doctor for sure. Whether gender or ethnic background is important varies between cultures and countries. In some cultures, female patients are not allowed to be examined and treated by male physicians. During the apartheid regime in South Africa, black patients did not receive the same treatment as white patients did. So attributes of participants can matter. In India, it could be caste, gender, religion, and various other attributes. Okay. Positions of participants. Participants occupy positions in action situations. Examples of positions include students, professors, players, referees, voters, candidates, suspects, judges, buyers, sellers, legislators, guards, licensed drivers, physicians, and so forth. You can obviously make this list very long. It's very important to understand that positions do not refer to people, but rather to the roles that participants can play in an action situation. For example, in a market situation in your local mall, the same person may be a seller when she's at work at the Apple store, helping customers choose their latest iPhone, and a buyer when she goes for lunch in the food court. Thus, positions and participants are separate elements in a situation, even though they may not be clearly so identified in practice. So your roles may keep switching from seller to buyer, right? In practice, the number of positions, but some things don't switch so easily. Doctor and patient, it's not always possible to switch those. In practice, the number of positions is frequently significantly less than the number of participants. In a class, there are typically only two positions, student and professor, while there may be hundreds of participants. Hunters who have a valid license all occupy the position of a licensed hunter, and while there are more than 1 billion participants at Facebook, there are only a limited number of positions, such as the person featured on the web page or the administrator of a page representing an organization. So this is just kind of details, but it gives you a sense of diversity of action situations and action arenas where the positions are constantly changing. The outcomes and the actions of the participants depends on many attributes and the information they have and their position. The nature of a position assigned to the participants in an action situation both defines a set of authorized actions and sets limits on those. For example, licensed drivers may operate a motor vehicle on a road or a highway, but this action is also restricted by speed limits. Just because you have a driver's license doesn't mean you can drive in any direction at any speed. There are lanes, there are directions in which you need to go, and there are speed limits. Those who hold the position of a member of a legislative committee are authorized to debate issues and vote on them. The member who holds the position of chair can usually develop the agenda for the order of how issues will be brought before the committee, or even whether a proposal will even be discussed. The order of events on this agenda may affect how the votes turn out. If you do a group project, how do you organize a group? Will different group members have different roles? Is one of the members leading the discussion? Okay, so here is another example. Barack Obama in the position of the President of the United States of America, the US Supreme Court, this is American book, so lots of examples from the US, judges on the television show American Idol, and a police officer. So what the participants do here and what their relative positions are here is very different than here, and the people who bring the cases and the lawyers who argue in front of them and what the justice can do and what their position is very different. And the president is elected, but once he's elected he has all sorts of powers because he's the executive running the country. But in another situation, if he goes to a McDonald's, he's just a customer, even though his security will make sure that nobody misbehaves with him, of course, right? So you get the idea. So let's come back and look at potential outcomes in the next podcast to keep just some sort of a distinction between the topics. So let's go back and stop this podcast. It's only 9 minutes, but it doesn't matter so much. Okay.